Hi everyone, welcome back. In this video, we're going to be discussing about props and slots in Vue.js. If you're a very experienced front-end engineer who works with Vue.js, or you're just starting out Vue.js, and you've been having issues with props and slots, when to use them, how do you use them, what exactly is props, what exactly is slots, this is the right video for you. In this video, we're going to be explaining what props is, what slots is. We're going to be looking at a practical example of how to make use of props and how to make use of slots, and also when do you use props and when do you use slots, the advantage of each of them. Now all of those things I've listed will be covered in this video. Now if you enjoy using Vue.js and you're so curious about knowing how to make use of props and slots, let's dive straight into the practical aspect of this video. So right now, if you look at my screen, you would see that I've been able to bootstrap a very simple new Vue.js project, and all I just had to do was basically just use Vite or Vite to create the project using the yarn create Vite, and I was able to get this layout done. And if you look at my app.vue, we now have the router view, which allows us to make use of view router. Well, this is not the major focus of our video, so all of this part can be set up in any way you want it to be set up, but the major part of our video is basically you getting to see how the props and slots are being used in Vue.js. Now, in the views, I'm going to be creating a new file called the props.vue, and I'm still going to be creating one more file which is called the slots.vue. So in my home page, which is this one, I'm just going to make something very simple, which I already have. I'm just going to copy that and replace it. So I'll take this and replace what I have here and save it, and also go into my router file and import those two pages which I have just created. The first one is the part, which is going to be slots, and the second one, so this is going to be a name of slots, and we're going to use the component. We're going to lazy load the component. So this is going to be import, then we're going to be importing from views, and we're inside of views, we're going into slots.vue file. Now the same thing applicable for slots will be done to the props. So in this case, this is going to be props. Here would also be props, and here would be props. Now if we save these and we go to the home page, you can see we've linked those two files here. And now if we go to our page, we should have something like this exactly. So when we click on this, okay, now it says at least one template is required. Yes, that's because we've not created a template for that for now, but you can see we now have the two examples linked. Now the next thing would be go inside of the slots file and just create a very simple template that just says this is the slot page. Do the same thing on the props. This is the props page, so that right now we can be able to refresh this and see what it looks like. So let me see, we run dev. Okay, then if we go to our file, we can see that we get this is the props page, and here we get this is the slot page. Now, how do we make use of slot? What exactly is slot? Basically, when you talk about slot, is you being able to pass informations to a particular reusable component. Now, take for example, you have a profile card, like a card or a component that displays user profile, like the name, the address, the occupation, the hobby, stuff like that. And you're trying to display all of these details in a component. And basically, you know that when you're dealing with components can be reusable across several areas of your application. So for example, your profile card could be reusable in like 2 to 3 areas of your application. And the only way the profile card can be able to take in information at several areas is you implementing what we call the props. And how do you implement props in Vue.js? In our own case, for the components, we're going to create a new file called profile display prop. Now when we create profile display prop dot view, that's what we've created. Now we've created the profile display prop dot view. I'm just going to call this props so that it looks more meaningful. I'm going to call this profile display props. Now we've created this file, profile display props. Now I'm just going to go straight and set this up. So we have the scripts. We're going to be using the setup method, and we have the templates, and we'll also have the style. So I already have the style written out, so just so that we don't waste so much time on that. So I'm just going to copy what I have in the style and paste it here. Then in the templates area, I'm going to copy this, what I have in my templates, and paste it here. So now you would notice that for our templates, we're expecting dynamic data like the first name, the last name, the email, address, and the rest of them. Now these data are expected to be passed into this component dynamically, which means we're accepting props. Props properties, same thing, but in Vue.js case, it's called props. So we're accepting props into this profile display props component. And we're expecting the props to be first name, last name, email, address, and the rest of them. But this setup is not complete because this component does not know yet that we're expecting props. Now, how do you implement that? There is a method called define props in Vue.js, in Vue 3, when you're making use of the setup. When you define props, you can be able to define what props you're expecting in your component. And for our own case, in our define props, we're going to be expecting all of these things which we've listed here: the first name, the last name, the email, and the rest of them. Now, how do we set that up? The first thing we have to do is specify what we're expecting, the first name. And for the first name, we want a type to be of string, and we also want it to be required. So which means you must pass that value of the first name. Now, same thing will be applicable to other values like the last name, the email, address. So we have, this is for last name, email, address, occupation, and hobby. So now we change this from first to last. Last name is also going to be a string because, your last name should be characters, words that can be readable, and it also needs to be required. The next value here is the email, and we're expecting our email to be string and also required. After the email, we have the address. We're also expecting our address to be string and required. Likewise, the occupation and the hobby, which would also be string and would also be required. Now, this is how you set up props in your component. So this particular component, which is profile display props, now knows that you are expected to pass in all of these values because they are all required, and the values that are passed in would fill up these dynamic interpolations that we have here, which are all of these things. Now, how do you make use of this component in your props.view? How do you bring in this component, and make use of it? Now, all you just need to do is we'll have the setup, which is the script, just the same way we had it on the other side. Now, inside of the script, this would also be of type setup, and inside of here, we'll be importing the components. So we'll be importing profile display props, and in the templates, we're going to be making use of profile display props. So let me just create this. Just going to call this page wrapper so that we can apply some styling. Then welcome to props example page. Now inside of here, we would now make use of the profile display props. Now you would notice that in this props component, if you look at this, you can see that we're expected to pass first name, last name, email, address, occupation, and hobby. Now, those are the things that are going to be passed into this component. And remember, this component was what we created before here, and we're expected to pass all of these data because they are required. So in our own case, all we just need to do is we go inside of this component and we can go ahead and pass all those data. So I can just say, I want the first name to be John. I want the last name to be Doe. I want the email to be johndoe@gmail.com. I want the address to be 3A Elliott Street, Lagos. I want the occupation to be fishing, and I want the hobby to be skating. Now, we've been able to pass all of these data inside of the profile display props. And you will notice a difference that our first name and our last name are not having the camel case, just the same way we have it here. And that doesn't matter because your camel case can be interpreted as, hyphen between the first word and the second word. So which means if you have first name as it is here or last name as it is here, you can pass them as, as this way, the way we have it. Now, if we save this and go straight into, so it says define props is a compiler macro and no longer needs to be imported. Well, let's see. So now if we save this and go to our page, to the props usage, you can see we now have first name John, email this, occupation this, last name, and the rest of them. Now, this is how you make use of props. This is how you pass data into a particular component that is reusable. Now, take for example, this same component is being used somewhere else in our application, and you have to, pass a different value. Let's say we have Adams, and here we have Graham, and we save this. You would notice that when you go back to your page, you're having a different value, Adams, Graham. So this way you've been able to pass data into that component via the props. And the reason why we had to pass all of these data are because inside of the components, we have declared in the props that we're expecting all of these data and they are required. So which means none of them is optional. They are all data that needs to be passed. So to wrap up the props side of this tutorial of this video, like I said earlier, props is basically you being able to pass in dynamic informations into a component. And the way you set up props is the component that expects the data is configured to accept props which are being listed the way we have them here. And for the ones that are required, you have to pass it there that it's being required so that by the time you are putting in the data at this point, it tells you that this particular props is required and you have to pass it. Now, likewise, if you need to pass other informations like, let's say, currency, we have stuff like maybe currency, we have stuff like maybe address, optional address, we have stuff like maybe whatever information you feel you want to add to what you already have. These are the way you pass them through props. Now, that's all we need to understand about props. And props is though more than this because you can also pass objects, arrays into props. And for you to get all of that done, you can go into the Vue.js documentation on the props segment and you can see other examples of props. But what we've shown you so far here is basically like a very practical approach of how to make use of props. Now, having explained that, we'll go straight into how to make use of slots. Now, what exactly is slot? Or when you say slot, what do we mean by slot? Now, let's get to the slot area of this documentation, and you can see that basically from what we can see here is Vue being able to, we have learned that components can accept props, which we've also said. Now, how about template content? For example, you want to pass a template fragment to a child component, and you want the child component to render the fragment. So for example, you want to pass a whole template inside of another template. Just like the way we have this one here. This is a template. Now you're expected to pass the whole of these templates inside of another template. That is where the slot usage comes in. Now let's see a practical approach of how to make use of slots. I'm just going to create something similar, and I'm going to name this profile display slot so that you can see the difference. And in the slots.vue here is where we're going to make use of slots. Now, before we do that, in our profile display slot, it's going to be something so similar to what we already have. But the only difference is what you're going to be seeing here. Now, we have this, and in our template, inside of our template is where we're going to have all of that. So let me just get the CSS just to make our application a bit styled. So now we have the CSS style, and I'm just going to copy all of these from a project that I already did and paste it here. So now we have this. Now inside of our templates is where we're going to specify all we need, and I'm just going to create a div with a profile wrapper. Inside of our profile wrapper, I'm going to create another div, and this div is basically just going to be a class info section, and the reason is so that it can match with this style which we already have here. Now inside of the info section, I'm going to create the first slot, which would display the slot is going to display first name and last name. So I'm going to name these slots biodata. I'm going to copy this, paste it again, and name the next slot secondary info, and do that for the last one, which is basically going to be optional info. Now you would notice a difference between what we have now in slots and what we had in props. Now in the props, we outlined all the styles inside of here and basically just accepted dynamic data. But for the case of the slot, we're expecting a whole template inside of here. So which means we're expecting the whole of these things together with the whole HTML tags and all of that passed inside of here as the slot. And you would notice that each of our slots have name. The first one has biodata, the second one has secondary info, the last one has optional info. Now, how do we make use of this within the slots here? How do we, show those datas inside of the component, which is the profile display slots component? Now, all we have to do here is something similar to what we had in the props. We're going to create a script section here, and in the script section we would import the profile display slot component. Now we've been able to import these, and the next thing here, I already have the style so that we don't waste time on the style. So I'm going to copy the style, and the style is something very simple, just the page wrapper. So I'm going to copy the style, and here now we can now write what we want to write, which is basically the profile display slot, which is this component here. Now you'd notice that this is how we create a slot. Now for the first one, which was the props, we had to pass those datas inside of the opening tag of the component which was imported. But in this case, for the slot, we are passing it in between the opening tag and the closing tag, just like a normal element. But what differentiates them is we have to wrap it up in a template tag. And remember before now I said in the slots here, for each slot we specified the name. So here we're expecting biodata, which means in the slots for this template, the ID of this template would be biodata. And inside of this template is where we can now pass what exactly we're trying to pass, which is first name as John, and also the second one, which is the last name as Doe. Now, We'll do the same thing for the remaining two, which is secondary info and optional info. So here we'd have secondary info, and finally would have optional info. And for the secondary info, we're making use of, we're calling the email, and we're also calling the address. So let me just put this. Now for the optional info, we're calling occupation, which was I think it was fishing, and we were calling hobby, which was skating, I guess. Now when you save this and go to your application, let's see, we now go to slots here. If we go back to the home page and go to slots, you find out that we have the same thing that we had inside of our props. Now this is the props and this is the slots. They're having the same data, but there's a difference in the setup. And what exactly is the difference? You find out that the props accepted the data within the component, inside of the opening tag and the closing tag. Within the opening tag rather is where we have the props, and that's because of the way it was set up from here, which is basically you accepting them as dynamic data. And for the slot, we accepted it as a template, so which means we're expecting this to be a template of its own, which is basically like a component. We're also expecting this to be another template, which is basically like another component, which is the reason why we have them wrapped in the template fragment, unlike the way it was in the props. And you notice that each of the templates has like an identification that matches what we have here in our slot name value. And that's how you make use of slots and props. So now the question now is, when do I make use of props and when do I make use of slot? And it's very simple. If you have to pass in dynamic data into a component, like just normal data, like maybe profile of users, informations of products, stuffs like that, the best structure to use is a props. And all you need to do is just the component that's accepting the props, you go into that component, set up the component, put in all the required values that the props needs to have, and pass it within the component. Now for the slot, when you have to pass in a template fragment, like a whole component that has to do with all the HTML values and all of that, if you need to pass it inside of another component, just like the way we did it here, where we had to pass the whole of this template, which is seen as a component, inside of another component, which is the profile display slot. In the scenario where you have to pass in a whole component or a bunch of components into another, then you can make use of the slots. Like I said before, props, when you're dealing with dynamic data where you have to just pass in profile details, informations of products and the rest of them, you make use of props. And when you're dealing with components where you have to pass all of a template or a chunk of components into another, then you can make use of slot. Now to back all of this and to support all of this, which we've displayed and shown in this tutorial so far, all you have to do is take your time to go through the documentation here. It has other fanciful stuff which you can try out. The reason for this video was to give you like a practical approach of when to make use of slots and how to make use of them, and also when to make use of props and how to make use of them. If you found this video very interesting and very useful, kindly give us a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and also share this video with other Vue.js developers which you have out there. If you have any questions about anything in the video, anything you feel you don't understand, the comment section is widely open for you to put in anything you feel like putting in. Just let me know the questions you have, and I'm going to take my time to answer every one of every questions that is found in the comment section. Now, if there are no other things to talk about, you can just suggest any other video which you feel we should put out there. If you're a Vue.js developer or you make use of Vue.js and you're expecting something or you feel you don't understand something, just put it in the comments, and trust me, the video will be dished out. Like, we're gonna look into it and dish it out. Now, that's basically the whole about this video, and I believe that with the help of this video, you've been able to get a better understanding of how to use props and how to use slots. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.